covering the WebView example. So for this one, what you're gonna need to go to Canvas and download the permissions example template. This one will give you a project with the following contents. First off, you're gonna find already a created activity main layout, which will have a label, a text input, a button, and a web view. Then we will have a main activity, which will have just the boilerplate code with an onCreate and the widgets that we have on our layout. We're gonna be implementing a feature in which whenever we enter a text into this text input and we click on the button, it will load the corresponding web page into the web view. So for that one, the first thing that we need to do is, well, we're dealing with a button, so if we want to react to anything from the button, we need an on-click listener. So let's call it the go button listener. Now, since we're gonna be getting the input from the edit text, and just get that into a string. The text, parse it into a string. Then what we're gonna be doing is just using a little bit of text processing to just do a small validation on the URL. So let's validate that the URL is actually an HTTPS valid address. So valid, I mean that its formatting starts with HTTPS. So whether the URL exists or not, that's not something that we're gonna check. So all that we're gonna be doing is using the URL library to parse the target string. Now we can use the URI to access the different parts of the URL. In this case, we want the scheme. So if the scheme is null, it means that it doesn't have a valid HTTP or HTTPS header. Now, it could also be a different type of URL, like a file, and in this case, the scheme is going to be file, but we're going to assume that the user is going to enter just a URL. Now, if it's null, it means that it doesn't have one, so we're just going to go ahead and add it to the URL. Good. Then after we do that check, we can say WebView, and then we have a method called load URL. For this one, all you do is give it an URL, and the WebView will try to load it as a web page into its corresponding view. Now that's good. Now let's do just one more change here, just to validate this. So let's do a default page, so that when it opens, it doesn't open empty. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's run our application. Okay, see how it opens in blank? So we would like to show the user that there's actually a web view here. So we're gonna do that by opening by default just a default URL. So let's go and create a default URL. And we already have a string resource for it. So you will just call get resources.get text. And we pass the ID, which is going to be r.id dot r.string default URL. And then we just say WebView load our default URL. This is an extra sequence, so let's convert it into a string as well. And now let's go ahead and test our app. Okay, now we're getting a web page not available. So it seems like our app is not loading that one. Let's see if we can open something else. And, no, it's not working thus far. So so pause the video and try to come up with a reason why it will not be working. So as you can see, this didn't load. When I click the button, nothing happened. So pause the video, think about it for a couple moments, maybe a minute or so. Look at the code that we wrote thus far, and then once you're done, if you figured it out, fine. If you're like, I have no idea, that's fine, just resume the video. Hi, you're back. Okay, so the first thing that you notice is that the button doesn't work. Remember that it's not good enough to have a listener, we have to register the listener to the button, which we have not done yet. So we have to set the onClick listener to the listener that we created, and that's it. Now, that will not change the fact that our web view is not loading anything. So the main reason for that is that we haven't given permissions to our app to load or to access the internet. So that's why we're getting this error that says error cache mix. So it just simply says that it could not load anything from the internet. So for this one, the only thing that we need to do is add a permission. So remember, permissions go over here, just above the application tag, and it is uses permission. And the name of the permission that we're gonna use is access to the internet. So we want our app to have access to the internet. Let's try one more time. Oh, I don't think applying with the changes will work. Yeah, I need to reinstall it. The app because we made changes to the manifest. So whenever you make a change to the manifest, it will require you to reinstall the app just because that's the way the phone knows that the app now has those permissions. Okay, now it's not loading here, it's blank. So, oh, it opened, but on our web page. So, what's happening here is that when we call the web view, what Android is doing is calling the default browser application that it has to open the URLs. So what we have to do in our app is to tell Android that the web client that we're going to be using is not the client given by Android or the default app. So for that one, we have WebView, set view client, and let's just create a new WebView client as the parameter. So all this is saying is that when you try to open a URL with this WebView, you will use the web client that I'm giving you here, just an empty web client that will be bound to the web view itself. So let's go ahead, run our app once again. Web view client. Another reference. Okay. Okay. So I'm trying to do it before I get a reference to the web view itself. So it should go under here after we get a reference to it in memory. and now it should work. Just wait for it to load. And there we go. It loads the web page here instead of opening it on the browser. Now let's test our particular input here. So let's try patreon.com. Click go, and it opens the page here. Now notice that we didn't give the HTTPS information here, so it just loaded it when we did it. Now Android is also filling up any incomplete parts of it. So if we try to do something like, we're not filtering by domain, so if we try to go to a .NET page, it will still work as long as this is a valid website. Now if you can see here, we can see that the Android is getting a lot of data and information about it. There is just one more thing that I want to show you, and is that right now, if we try to do something like this, it will not be able to load. So this happens due to a security change on the web views in Android. So by default, it will not load HTTP. It will only load HTTPS addresses or URLs. So one way to make it so your application can also support it is to do a small change and tell to the application, and this is something called a clear text traffic. So there is a little attribute here, it's called Android, and it says that it's enable clear traffic, and we say it's true. So let's run our app once again. Let's try entering the HTTP rather than HTTP address here. Unknown URL scheme. Oh, too many keys. Perfect. So now we can load HTTP and HTTPS addresses on our web view. So one thing that you can work on exploring here, if you want to play a little bit more with it, is to have another button that loads the default URL as well. So that will require you to modify the layout a little bit and just play a little bit with the URLs. It shouldn't be too difficult. There's all the code that you need is already there. You just need to add one more button. So that's it for this one, and you will need to be doing something with the WebView in assignment 2. So make sure that you understand how to load web pages URLs into the WebView. Thank you.